Today we're looking at why scale length matters for your guitar tone and what does it sound like. What tonal benefits or playability benefits or downsides does it offer you? And is it worth getting an extended range guitar or an extended scale length guitar? If you don't know, scale length is the distance between the nut and the bridge on your guitar. How long that is, at least here in the US, measured in inches. And the typical scale lengths we find are 24 3/4 or the Gibson scale length, and the even more common 25 1/2 or Fender scale length. These have been standards for a long time, and most 6-string guitars fit into one or the other. Typically, the Fender scale length is more common, though obviously on Gibson or Epiphone or brands that are emulating those guitars will have a slightly shorter scale length. A longer scale length means you can get away with slightly thinner strings at the same tension. 20 pounds on your low E on a Gibson scale length might be 22 pounds on a Fender scale length. I'm making those numbers up, but you can use a string tension calculator online, which I can link below in the description, and that will tell you what your preferred gauge of strings and your guitar scale length equals in pounds of tension. And then you can find other string sets that are similar that you might like the tension numbers better, or you can use that to build custom string sets in a different tuning. So if you're down tuning, this is relevant. Despite the popularity of down tuning in metal, we don't always see a ton of options for scale lengths. There are, of course, a number of models out there that have extended scale lengths, but those are typically extended range guitars, either 7-string or 8-string or 9-string. There's another good tone demonstration video I'll link below where Rick Beato and Rhett Shull and a number of other guitarists tried out some different string gauges on the same guitar in the same tuning. So they were just going from heavier gauges to lighter gauges, and you can hear the difference in tone. A lighter string generally sounds better. In all their demonstrations, all of them agreed the lightest string sounded the best. Now, I don't personally like playing super light strings, and of course, if you tune really low with too light of a string, it just won't really work at all. It'll be too floppy. There is a point where too light is definitely not good. Now, today I've got 3 guitars all in drop A tuning. One has a scale length of 30 inches, one is 26 1/2, and one is a multi-scale guitar, but the low A is about 27 1/4. So all 3 different scale lengths. They are, of course, different guitars. This is not a scientific test, really. There's a lot of variables, the different pickups, different ages of the strings, the pickup height and the setup. Everything can impact the tone to some degree, but the general thing we can listen for is how that tone translates through different scale lengths. And despite those variables, there is something we can glean from this. So my guitars today, I've got a Squier vintage modified Jazzmaster baritone, and that's a 30-inch scale length guitar. We'll do a video about this one at some point, but it is a 30-inch 6-string baritone guitar. All of these guitars are going to be using the bridge humbucker, and this one only has a bridge humbucker. It also has a lot of the electronics removed, so only a volume pot, and it's a 1 meg volume pot, so it's as bright as the electronics setup can go, so that can also affect things, but maybe not a huge amount in a high gain context. I've got my Schecter Omen 7 Extreme, which has appeared in many of my videos. This one has a 26 1/2-inch scale length. It is a 7-string. I am playing on the low 7-string because we're in drop A for both of these examples. My last one is my Schecter Omen 8 Elite. That is a multi-scale 27 1/2 to 25 1/2-inch scale length, and that is an 8-string, but I'm playing on the 7th string, again in drop A for all these examples. The age of the strings, of course, is a big factor, and my Schecter Omen 7 has the oldest strings in this first clip, so it may sound darker because of that as well. And the Squier Jazzmaster has the newest strings. The Omen 7 in the second clip, I have found an old track that I know I recorded when the strings were brand new, so that will get a fair shake in that one, and we'll see if the difference between those two is very noticeable or if it has a lot of the same qualities. Is it a factor of strings or not here? Here are the string gauges and the tensions for all these. I don't know them off the top of my head, so you're seeing a graphic that will tell you. The longer the scale length, the lighter string you can get away with while still hitting the same amount of tension. And again, lighter strings generally sound better, but we want a tension that we're comfortable with, and so I make custom string sets for all my guitars based on the tensions I like, unless I'm just in a standard tuning. In this first clip, I've got a variety of riffs in a pretty lightly processed mix. There's no EQ on the guitars. I've got a NAMM profile that I made of my tube amp running through just some IRs, and that's all that's going on the guitars. And of course, all the guitars are going through the exact same chain. Listen for the clarity, especially of the open low notes. I think you can hear a difference there. And if you don't, maybe this isn't something that should really concern you much. If you have any doubt that scale length matters for tone, take a look at pianos. I work on pianos for a living, so I get to play a lot of them. I get to play really high-end instruments and not so high-end instruments. One of the main differences between a really expensive piano and a cheap piano is how long it is, how long the strings are. A concert grand piano is about 9 feet long on average, and of course that means it has a longer soundboard, a bigger soundboard overall, but also the length means it can use thinner strings than if you were to make that same pitch on a heavier gauge string at a shorter length. When you want a really nice and loud, powerful piano with clear bass, you want a really long piano. And there's a big difference even between a 9-foot and a 7-foot instrument. Nothing really sounds like a concert grand in those low notes. You just need the length and the right gauge strings to produce a powerful and clear tone with nice overtones, with a balanced sound, and everything you want out of a concert grand. No matter what, a heavier gauge string is going to be more muddy and cloudy in the bass and the low mids and have less high overtones, and a lighter string is going to have more of those upper overtones and a clearer fundamental less clouding in the low end. In this next clip, I went back to a song I recorded for sure when the 7-string had new strings on it. This was my song Goliath that is out on all streaming platforms if you want to listen to the whole thing. But I know that I recorded these right after I replaced the strings on my 7-string. And so those are fresh in this clip. But I think the character of the strings, while they might be slightly brighter, still has that cloudiness in the low mids. But I'll let you judge for yourself. And of course, I just recorded the parts on the other guitars so we can get the comparison. This last little clip is just a single open low A on each of these guitars, and then I'll stick the rest of the isolated guitar tracks at the end of this video. So what are my conclusions and recommendations as far as scale length? I do think it matters. I do hear the difference, though I don't think it's going to make or break your song. If you don't have the optimal guitar for a certain tuning, don't let that stop you from making music. If you can get the best sound possible out of it, go for it. And if it doesn't sound great, but it's still a good song, people don't really know or care what scale length you're playing at. But I do think there's a certain tone that you can't really get with thicker strings on a shorter scale guitar. And you might be able to get away with thinner strings than I prefer, but I'd rather sacrifice a little bit of tone for being comfortable with my strings and playing something that I like. As far as these three guitars in terms of playability, I would say the hardest to play is the Omen 8 because it's a multi-scale, and that's the main reason. Multi-scale takes some time to get used to, and I have been playing it for months now, and I still feel like it's a little bit awkward. I can play it just about as well as anything else, but when recording even just these couple of riffs, it took me more takes. It's a little harder to control exactly the sound of my palm mutes on this angled bridge. I've been playing for so long on a straight bridge that it can be a little hard to get the right amount of chug. You can dial in your chugs a little more or less, and this guitar I feel like is a little harder to nail exactly the tone I would like every time. So that's the hardest one because it's a multi-scale. The next is the 30-inch baritone. It is a bit easier in some ways because it's a 6-string. It feels very comfortable in that sense. It's nice playing a 6-string because I play a lot of 7 and 8 strings. And it's cool to have a low-tuned 6-string, so I really like that. However, a 30-inch scale definitely feels pretty big. I don't notice as much between the 26.5 and the 27.5. It doesn't feel that much bigger than a regular guitar, and I play bass too, so none of that matters too much. But the 30-inch scale is definitely, it's right about halfway between a guitar and a bass scale. A typical bass scale is 34 inches, so a 30-inch scale is getting up there, and it's a little bit long. I can play pretty much everything just the same, but the extra space between the frets, the extra length of the neck, it makes me think about the guitar a little differently and come up with some different riffs, which I like. I like that it feels different, but it does feel different, and it is a little harder to play. You have to stretch a little more. Not a big deal for me because I'm used to bass, but I do think that is something that you might want to consider. If you're looking at a 30-inch scale guitar, it's going to be pretty different than a standard 25.5-inch scale guitar. On the 7, the extra inch longer scale length, I think, doesn't make much of a difference. For me, it's no harder to play than a 25.5-inch scale length. So that one's definitely the easiest to play. If I was designing my own signature guitar, and I'm open to offers from any company that wants to do that with me, I think I would probably want to try out a couple different scale lengths, but I would say straight frets rather than a multi-scale. I like the idea of a multi-scale, but at least a difference of 2 inches between the high and low strings I think is a bit much. I think the frets are a little too angled for my taste, and it is a little trickier to play. I also don't like the angling of the bridge as much. Now, maybe a slightly narrower multi-scale could be fun, but I also think straight frets would be fine on an extended scale length guitar. I think there's a purpose to multi-scale. I think it's a good idea, but maybe it's not my favorite. So I think straight frets on probably a 28-inch scale length would be about perfect for what I play. And I like usually drop A or even lower. So if I was going to drop A, drop G, drop F, even double drop E, I think 28 is a good balance between scale length and the length of the neck and the overall playability, maybe even 29. Now, there aren't a whole lot of guitars with a 28-inch scale length or 28.5. You see some with the 27.5, but not too many. And there isn't a whole lot of options out there. So, again, I'm open to offers if anyone wants to design a guitar with me. I've got a lot of ideas. The Meshuggah signature guitar is 29.4 inches. I think that would be pretty sick. Again, it's got straight frets. It is an 8-string, so that helps with that extra length. If you were going for a 7-string, something in a little higher tuning like G or A, then I think 28 or 28.5 could be a good length. But there aren't a whole lot of options out there. So there is a PRS that's 27.7, and that's a pretty good scale length, especially for a standard baritone tuning, which is going to be B standard, which that would work well. It's a little longer than most 7 strings. And if you did want to go down to A or even G, that's great. You could take it down to F. It's longer than my 8-string, which I have at F. And I think that sounds fine at F. But it might be nice for the extra low tunings to go even further. Why not? I think the benefits of a longer scale length outweigh the downsides to a point. And I think when you get up to that 30-inch scale length, like on the Squier Jazzmaster, it is perhaps a bit much. I kind of think it's fun, but it may not be to everyone's taste. And I think if it was 29 or 28, it would be even better. Maybe 28.5. That's a cool number. So that's my thoughts on scale length. I would go longer if you can, but the more outside of standard scale lengths you go, the more the price tag increases a lot. So if you're not looking to spend over $1,000 on a guitar, your options are kind of limited, unfortunately. And I wish there was more standard production models with a longer scale length. I do think there's a cheap one from Harley Benton that's a baritone. I may try to buy one just for fun. Try to use lighter strings wherever possible. Use a string tension calculator. Make custom sets of strings. Everyone plays in different tunings. People want different tunings to be unique. I think that's cool, but you need the right strings for that. You need to figure out what tension you like and make custom string sets. I have a very old video on it. All you need to do is put in the gauges of your favorite set of strings on the scale length of your guitar at the tuning you use and write down those numbers, and then figure out what gauges you'd need to match those numbers in a different tuning or in a different scale length. And you can get a sense of what gauges you want, and you may play around with them. Sometimes the numbers can be a little misleading, and what sounds good on paper ends up being too thick. I did that recently with my 5-string bass, and I put a 145 gauge low string for the low A0, and it's a bit thick. I had 125 on there before, and that was good, but it was a little loose, and I went all the way up to 145. It's fine, but it is a bit thick, and probably I should have gone with like 135. But hey, they're strings. You're going to replace them anyways. I like experimenting, so that's what I did. I also plan to take that Jazzmaster, since it has a 30-inch scale length, down to double drop E or double E standard and see how I like that. I've got the strings for it. I'm a little scared to put them on. Might have to file the nut some. It might be kind of a pain, but I think it'll be fun. And then I can have a guitar in F standard, my 8, and have a guitar in double drop E. And that'll be cool, I think. I don't know. Maybe it's getting too low and I won't like it. We'll find out, and I'll let you know. As always, smash like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.